International Women's Day. My name is Madison Sargis, and I'm a quantitative analyst at Morningstar. And I'm excited to be here with Laura Lutton.
Hi, I'm Laura Lutton. I'm head of manager research here in Chicago.
So on International Women's Day, I wanted to talk to you about women in the fund industry. I know this is an area that you're very passionate about and you've done a lot of research in.
Yeah, we started looking at this really closely in 2015. Here in the US, we wanted to count how many women fund managers there were on traditional open-end mutual funds. So we started with a very simple study, just counting the number of managers, and what we found was pretty surprising. The rate of women managers is less than 1 in 10 in the US, so very small numbers of women in the US fund industry.
Wow. What was the response on those findings?
So the response was really overwhelming. We've had hundreds of media mentions of the study since we released it about 18 months ago. And it's really prompted, I think, a healthy conversation in the fund industry about how we might change this. And in light of International Women's Day, Be Bold for Change is the theme. And I think that's really on the minds of a lot of asset managers. How do we get more women into this business?
I agree. What were some of the findings that you found in your 2015 study?
So, one of the things that we found, in addition to discounting, was we started to look at performance. And this is, I know, something we've spent a lot of time talking about. We found that actually mixed gender teams have the best performance, or did as of our study in 2015. I know that's something that we want to look at further, but I think what was really exciting about the 2015 study is it prompted further research from us on this, and I know you got into the game, so you want to tell everybody a little bit about the work we did in this latest study?
Yeah, so I had read your 2015 study, and it was immediately something I wanted to start researching, and so I was excited when you asked me if I wanted to help you with the 2016 study. And so one of the things that I immediately realized is I wanted to expand your study from just the U.S. To the entire global market.
So tell us a little bit how you did that, because when we were looking at the U.S. market, it's about 7,000 managers, and you were looking at thousands and thousands of rows across 56 countries. How did you decide which of those rows were men and which were women?
Yeah, so there's 26,000 managers in our database, and Morningstar has gender data on about half of them.
Okay.
But we did have the first names of the rest of the managers.
Okay.
And so when I was looking around, I found an algorithm that would identify gender based on the first name of the manager.
Okay.
But one of the things that we found was that since our study was global, names in certain regions are associated with different genders. So, for example, in France, Patrice is a name more associated with men, versus in U.S., Patrice is a name more associated with women. So I had to do a lot of LinkedIn verifying,
okay,
a lot of Google searching, but I think in the end we were able to identify over 26,000 different people.
And then what did you find when we started looking at all of those 26,000 managers?
Well, so worldwide, women don't make up, aren't very highly represented in the fund industry. So in the U.S., it's about 10%. Similarly, in Germany, in Great Britain. So it was a little bit of disappointing to find that.
Now, were there some countries that had better representation?
Yeah, so we found that in Hong Kong, Singapore, some of these more emerging markets, women more better represented.
Okay. So in countries where maybe the fund industry isn't as old or is this well established, women are making more gains than they are in countries where the mutual fund industry may be closer to 100 years old.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd say also on that point, we found that very similar trends with the types of funds that women manage.
Okay.
And so women were more associated with managing, newer products such as ETFs, team managed funds, fund of funds.
Okay.
Rather than managing some of those like established active equity funds.
That's interesting, and that that's consistent with what we saw in 2015 in the U.S. as well. We saw that women were more likely to be, in the outside the middle of the Morningstar style box, and more funds that are more fringe. They tended to be more expensive, and it sounds like in those core kind of old school active equity funds, even globally, we weren't seeing a lot of representation of women managers.
Yeah.
Interesting. Tell us a little bit. I know one of the things that we hoped to do in 2015, which we weren't unable to do, is really get into whether women manage their portfolios differently than men. So there's some academic research out there that looks at retail accounts that suggests that women tend to trade less, maybe be more conservative in their investing. We were hoping to look at that in our 2015 study. We just didn't have enough women running funds to draw good conclusions there, strong conclusions. But in the latest study, we were able to look at that. Tell the folks what we found.
Yeah, I think what's mostly really encouraging about our study was that a lot of the academic findings, we found too in our data. So, for example, there's a lot of research that women in retail brokerage accounts trade less than men. They don't trade as frequently.
Okay.
And we found that women were more associated with funds that had lower turnover ratios.
All right.
We also found that women were, again, more likely to be on teams, and that's something that researchers have found that's not just specific to the fund industry. That's, women are, better work in teams, across all different types of professions.
And that's a good thing in terms of opportunities for women in the fund industry, because we've seen some movement towards team management. More funds are team managed today than they were certainly 10 years ago. So that's good news in terms of opportunities for women.
Yeah. And we also do find that women are more likely to have their CFA in certain asset classes, which I think is also encouraging, that women are going out and getting that extra education and, are being qualified for these jobs.
That's great. That's great. So one of the other things that you studied that we weren't able to do in the first study was look over time at whether women have been improving in terms of their representation in the fund industry. What did you find there?
Yeah, I'd say this was probably the most disappointing finding out of everything that we found, that when you look through time, the rate of women in the industry hasn't increased. It's actually decreased. And so I thought, maybe naively, that since 2008, since 2009, that the rate of women in the industry would have been on an upward trend. But that's just not what the data shows.
Well, that's disappointing.
Yeah.
You would think in this era of lean in and firms being more deliberate about recruiting a diverse workforce, that we would see improvements in the fund manager numbers, but that just didn't bear out.
Yeah. So on International Women's Day, we had talked about before that it's, the theme is #BeBoldForChange.
Right.
And since we've seen that, women aren't being represented as frequently in the industry, what do you think that, the industry can do to diversify, the people who are actually managing the money? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we've looked at this from a pipeline perspective, right? Like, you're not going to have a higher number of women fund managers if we don't have a higher number of women that are qualified for that role, right? That perhaps started as securities analysts in a firm and sort of worked their way up and then were named fund manager. So, we did some testing of the pipeline in our 2015 study and found that there just aren't enough women in that CFA program that you mentioned and so forth to really move the needle in terms of the number of fund managers. So that's one area where we could impact change, be bold for change, is to get more women in the industry in the beginning. The CFA Institute is very involved in recruiting more women. I'm actually talking with Leah Bennett, who's been very active in that effort. She's going to be a panelist at the Morningstar Investment Conference in Texas on Friday. And so through this effort where the CFA has been trying to attract more women, they're starting to see the needle move a little bit, which is great. We're excited to see that kind of improvement early in careers.
That's great. What do you think, that's at the industry level, what can Morningstar do on this topic, whether that's research or our own programs? What can we do?
So I think Morningstar has been really mindful about how we build our management pipeline as well. And, we hired Madison into the Morningstar Development Program a few years ago. And that's certainly an area where we want to attract women so that we can create nice, long, robust careers for them. I'm a founder of the Women's Initiative here at Morningstar, where we're really focused on that, being a support group and helping women develop the leadership skills that they need to get management roles and other higher responsibility roles here at Morningstar. So that's one thing that we can do. The other thing we can do is research. And I know that's an interest of ours. And maybe you want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you'd be interested in exploring with more data and more time.
Yeah, with more time, there's a few research topics that I hope to get to look into in 2017. I think the biggest feedback that we've got from our papers is that we haven't really tested, is there a performance difference between men and women in the industry?
Right.
Do women outperform? And so I think that's something that I definitely want to address this year. But then I also think maybe, later on, really focusing on the portfolio construction types.
Yeah.
Because it's something that we've seen a little bit of research in, especially that there's lower turnover. You found that women are in specific niche markets. What does that mean for investors? And are women really only managing certain types of funds? So really looking at the investment styles.
Yeah, I think that would be a really interesting study. So I want to ask you a follow-up question on that, but I also want to tell folks in the audience who are watching Facebook Live that if you've got a question for us, you can type it into the comments section on your screen, and it will come up to us right here in the room, and we'd be happy to answer it. So I know we've had a lot of questions, particularly from the press since we released this latest study on, well, how come you can't tell really easily whether women fund managers have a performance difference from men? Just talk a little bit about why that's a hard question to answer.
Yeah, I think it probably seems at surface like a very simple, just grab all the funds run by women, grab all the funds run by men, and see if there's any differences.
Right.
But I think it's important to take into account that if we find women are more likely to be managing, ETFs or in certain categories, the return profiles of those funds are going to be very different.
Okay.
And the other thing is that we want to make sure that our study is robust, and so we're going to have to include more than just the U.S. If the U.S. only has, 700 or so women managers, we want to make sure they have enough data in the study.
Okay.
We have to make sure we have to go back in time far enough. So it takes a little bit to get all the data set up correctly to account for management changes, fund changes, and stuff of that nature.
Right. So you would basically build a database that would look at returns like by month or by week per manager, right?
Yeah,
so
by month. Per manager, and you have to associate it, depending on, when a manager takes over the fund.
Okay.
And when do you associate the returns for that manager?
Okay, not simple.
It's not as easy as it sounds.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
It takes a little bit to get the data all correct.
Yeah, that's good. So again, we're happy to take your questions. Just type them into the comment section and they'll come right to us. Tell me a little bit more about the factors that you looked at in terms of where women are finding more opportunity versus less. Like, do you have any theories about why ETFs, for example, have been more hospitable, or passive funds have been more hospitable to women?
Yeah, I think the reasons why have really come alive by actually talking to fund managers and asking, why do you think these, the data says this?
Yeah.
And I think you touched on this a little bit. It's that it's pretty hard to unseat a manager. If there's been a very successful manager managing the active OE funds, it's really hard to remove them because investors really come to trust that manager. So you're not really going to replace them. So when there's like a new suite of opportunities available, it's easier to go and become head of that fund when it's a totally new slate.
Okay. But you did control for growth.
Yes.
Right? So it's not like just because this area of the industry is growing, we're seeing more opportunity. Actually, when you remove that growth factor, it still looks good.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Looks like we've got a question here from Lisa. Why do you think there are fewer female managers in larger markets versus smaller markets? So I think that's getting at your point with the ETF growth as well, right?
Yeah. In more of the smaller markets, they're a little less established, so there's newer opportunities for people to come in, versus the larger, it's the same thing. It's established. It's hard to unseat a manager.
There are fewer managers, right, that are already in those roles, so that presents more opportunities for women.
Laura, we have a question for you.
Okay.
Can you tell us more about the Morningstar's Women's Initiative?
Sure. So the Women's Initiative got started almost 3 years ago. And it was just, Morningstar is a very entrepreneurial kind of company, and the Women's Initiative got started in a very similar fashion. Just a few of us said, hey, wouldn't it be great if we had a group that was sponsoring programming and encouraging mentorships and so forth for women at Morningstar, so that they have the skills that they need to earn higher level positions here. So we got together, and the group group has grown. We have a couple hundred employees who are members, and we do regular educational programming. I know we're involved in an event tomorrow where we're going to talk about this research a little bit more with some other women in Chicago who work in the industry. And there's been a lot of work we've done on goal setting and sort of how do you manage your own career so that you're well positioned for leadership in the future. So it's been a fun effort. I've gotten to know a lot of really interesting women in the company that I haven't gotten to work with directly, and it's been really rewarding.
That's great.
Yeah. All right, we've got a question from Jamie. Do we have any suggestions for young women who are interested in finance careers? So I guess that's a good question for you, Madison, because I'm interested in how you found Morningstar and got interested in this kind of career.
Yeah, so I actually became interested in investing when I was about 8 years old. I went to an Apple store and I bought my first iPod, and I was like, Dad, I want what is stock? I want to buy stock in this company.
Okay.
And so I've always been interested in, buying stocks, and so that's how sort of where, I've kind of always had an interest and a passion for. And so when I was in college and I was looking for, a place to start my career, Morningstar really appealed to me. Mostly because of its mission. I really liked how, we're on the side of the investors. We care about, the individual investor, and I think we always try to do right by them. And so, that's what drew me to Morningstar. And also the development program.
Right.
I think it's a great way for someone who doesn't know exactly what part of the industry they want to go into. You can sort of navigate different roles and try out different areas to eventually find a spot, that you like. So it's been great for me.
I've read recently that there are a lot of millennials who view Wall Street as having a bad reputation, particularly since the financial crisis. And so this may not be a career that occurs to a lot of young women, but I think it's great because investing is a meritocracy, right? If you want to get into investment management and you put up good numbers, you're going to have plenty of employment opportunities, and that's a gender-neutral statement. I mean, that goes for men as well. And I think, the Morningstar mission about researching investments and helping investors make good choices is something that certainly appealed to me and would probably appeal to folks who are, maybe don't want to go work on Wall Street but are interested in the investment question and how to impact that.
Yeah, I agree. I think you have to dig a little bit deeper beyond those big headlines that you see in the newspaper, because there are, I think, a lot of companies trying to do right by investors, and Morningstar is a great example of that.
Yeah, I think if you're intellectually curious and you like to research and dig, there are a lot of great careers in this industry, and markets change, who's winning and losing changes, and I think it could be, I've worked here 17 years and I still think it's interesting, so that's good. Another question: How should young women learn more about investing? I think that's a great question because we've seen some data. Fidelity does a lot of data, collects data from its clients that show that women are actually less confident making investment decisions than men. Maybe they're just more willing to admit they're less confident. I don't know about that, but any ideas about how did you learn about investing and sort of get those early questions answered about stocks?
I like to read, so I started reading the Wall Street Journal, reading the business section of the New York Times. But if you don't have a subscription to either of those newspapers, I think there's a lot of great online resources. And I think Hello Wallet has a classroom type thing where you can learn about different retirement options, like what is a 401k, and it really goes down to the basics. I think it just takes a little bit of digging to find the information, because I think a lot of companies want to get people involved and want to make it approachable, so they've put out content to help.
Sure. Okay, we've got a question from Lee. What has the reception in the industry been for your research, and has it been received positively? That's a great question. I think that it's almost to the person that I discuss this research with. The response is always, wow, I knew that women were, outnumbered by men in the investment industry, but I didn't know it was 1 in 10 or less than 1 in 10 for the U.S. market. But I've been really encouraged by how many investment organizations, advisory networks, and so forth have reached out to us to learn more about what we're doing. And I think we're really getting to this be bold for change stage of, okay, we've established that this is a deficiency. Now what do we do about it? And I think the industry is going to be talking a lot more about that in the coming years. And I think there are some pretty powerful forces out there that are focused on having a more diverse workforce. And I would, we talked about those small firms versus large firms earlier, and how the big firms, seem to be doing a better job of recruiting women and women fund managers. So, clearly I think there are some organizations out there that have made this a priority, and it's starting to show in the numbers that you've seen and we've researched together.
Yeah.
So that's good.
I'd agree.
Good. Well, it looks like maybe we're out of questions. Are there any final things that you want to add before we go here?
If you want to join us again on Facebook Live, feel free to like Morningstar's Facebook page.
Okay. Then you'll get notification when we're doing these types of events again. That's great.
So if you want to listen to Laura and I talk again.
Okay, that's right. We'll come back, talk more about women and investing. Well, that's great. Well, I hope you have a great International Women's Day.
You too.
And we'll look forward to talking about this more.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thanks, everybody.